Hi, Alan Hadley with PhotoNetWorks. Thanks for joining me for this next video tutorial. We're going to be shooting texture today. We're actually in a field and there's an old house that's over here to my right, and we're going to be shooting a window area, and we're actually going to be shooting the old wood and so on. Some of the elements we want to pay attention to when we're shooting texture is not only the composition and the subject matter, but our perspective based on the direction of the light. The whole point behind showing texture is showing how the light is moving across the subject. Shooting into the shadow is always a prerequisite to showing good texture. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, we're set up on our first shot, and as you can see, we're shooting this window, and with the window seal and the actual boards on the left hand side of the frame. And if you'll notice, and I'm going to walk around and point out a couple of things to you, what I'm looking at in this shot, and the reason I set up on this, was because of this symmetrical feel that I have here, and the texture of this board, the way the shadow's dropping underneath of this, and then of course the cracks and the nails and so on. But the thing that really drew me to this shot more than anything was this window frame and how dark it is inside the window. That contrast level between the light gray and the dark is what really sets this shot off and gives it a really nice feel. The overall composition is created by this element, and this element. Of course, we're always working in threes, so that's where this composition actually comes into play. We are now set up on our next photograph, and as we did with the waterfall shot in our first video that we posted, we never move the camera. We just basically are in a particular area, and there's many shots that are right here in front of me. It's just a matter of picking out that good composition and that good lighting. What we're set up on here is a chimney with a rose bush, a wild rose bush that's growing up the side of it. And what I decided to do is to photograph this because it has a tremendous amount of texture, but it also has some color to it, which the green, the little leaves of the rose bush give it texture also. Understand that texture comes in many forms, and you're not limited to one type of texture or another. So if your goal is to create texture or find texture, you can find texture in a number of different elements. So what we're showing, and I'm going to walk around the camera and show you a couple of things. What I'm looking at here is this line that's coming up here. I'm looking at this light area that's here and all of the texture that's on the rock, but then also the shadow side of the chimney. As you'll see, the corner of the chimney is actually in the center of our frame. So our composition is 1, 2, 3. This being at the lower portion of the frame, and this coming up with all of this good yummy texture. And that's what we're looking for. Now we're back to our close to our original composition that we had created, our first image. We actually just changed the angle on it. Our light changed a little bit. So what I decided to do is to do another shot of the window, but just come to the left a little bit more rather than shooting straight on. And as you can see, it gives us a totally different type of image. Again, utilizing the symmetrical ribs of the boards coming down the wall, and then showing more of the frame of the window at this point. And I think you'll find that the image is just as strong as the first one. It just has a different look and feel, and you can see the finished image right now. Okay, now we're set up on our next shot, and in this shot, as you can see, we have some other elements. We have a tree and a barn and so on. Our light is still coming from behind the grass, so we're going to be able to retain some really good shadow areas and be able to focus on that texture of the grass while including other elements. I'm also using about a 24-inch expandable disc to block the light from flaring my lens. It's something that you definitely need to consider getting, because it will allow you to not only travel lightly, but it'll alleviate any kind of flare that you might be able to get on your on your lens itself. And I'm going to show you what it looks like, and this is what it looks like. It's just a little silver and white disc. As you can see, it's silver on this side and it's white over on this side. And of course, you can just roll it up and it becomes very small, and you can just pack it in your camera case. Very simple. But that's what we use, and it just pops right out, and then you just hold it right over your lens to keep your lens from flaring. Okay, we're now set up on our next shot, and as you can see, there's some yellow flowers, an old barn, shed type building with a door. And what I want you to pay attention to in this particular shot is a couple of things. Number one, our perspective. We're at a low angle. We're shooting into the yellow flowers rather than standing straight up and down. We're probably 2.5 feet off the ground on a tripod, and we're shooting into the shot rather than down on top of the shot. I'm actually kneeling on the ground right now. Again, we used our silver disc to keep our lens from flaring, because we do have a little bit of frontal lighting, and we're adjusting our exposure. Now, something we haven't talked about is exposure. All of these shots that I've been doing have been at 1/50th of a second at 6.3 or 7.1 on the f-stop. Now, if you remember when we were shooting the flowers in the first video, if you'll notice these yellow flowers, they're actually moving. We can't go any slower than, say, around a 50th or a 60th of a second. And we kind of have to wait a little bit for the wind or the breeze to die down some, so that we can shoot this without having any kind of blur. Now, another neat thing would be is if we got a big gust of wind and we shoot it like that and all the yellow was blurred. That would be a really nice effect. And that way your building, of course, is not going to move, so it would be in sharp focus. Just some thoughts to think about. But perspective, number one, figure out your perspective. Once you see what you're going to shoot, figure out your perspective. Use that D factor. Go in a circle, in a semicircle, and find the best position to shoot your shot. I could shoot this from 4 or 5 different perspectives or 4 or 5 different positions, but I chose this one because to me, it was the most interesting. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right one. It just means it's the one that I chose. So, with that said, after this segment, you can see the finished image. Okay, what I did on this shot is I came in a little bit closer and I changed my perspective just a little bit, and I put these flowers a little closer to the lens so that I could show you the difference between where we were at before and where we're at now. Now remember, we're shooting with a 17 to 55 millimeter macro, or excuse me, a 17 to 55 millimeter VR 2.8 lens. I am shooting at 5.6 now and 6.3, 5.6 being the optimum exposure. Understand the focal length. That's what the key here is. If you wanted these flowers to be even more out of focus, you would use a longer focal length, say a 200 millimeter lens, for instance. You could do this exact same shot and shoot at 5.6 or 6.3 and get a much shallower depth of field, and you wouldn't have to be so close to the subject. You could be further away. And so focal length plays a big role in choosing what focal length to use based on the image that you're actually shooting. Okay, so that concludes shooting on location texture.